Apologize for my room here. I'm in a brand new building in downtown Denver, and they haven't finished fitting it out. It's very echoing in here. But anyway, I'm not going to do most of the talking today, so that's good. In terms of agenda, I'll just go through some quick housekeeping, and then we'll get to the main event, which is Chuck Wilson, who's the chairman of PASS, and Brandon is our host from Townsteel. And we'll have about 45 minutes hearing about the PASS methodology. And then we'll go into about 15 minutes of Q&A to wrap up the session. How is this going to work? For most of you, this is probably a new experience on this AirMeet platform. If you look at the icons on the top right there, you'll see that there's a chat icon. David's already posted something here. Feel free to chat amongst ourselves or to us, that's fine. But if you've got questions that you want to ask in the Q&A session, please enter them in the Q&A section. So it's that little icon, which is the next one there. Anything you hear you want to know more about, that would be good. A reminder, the session is being recorded. That's for all of our benefit, of course. But this is really your webinar. We're doing this for all of you guys attending. And so please make the most of it. Feel free to, even when we send out the recording, make sure that you forward it wherever you need to get it to. It would be great to get this message out as far as we can. So in terms of introduction, let me introduce Brandon. Brandon and I have been working together for a while now. My name is Greg Dixon from Visual Foundry. We're a marketing firm that supports manufacturing, particularly independent manufacturers, focusing mostly on the door hardware and access control as it relates to door hardware space. But Brandon and I have been working together pretty much all of this year around school safety, and we've been doing a lot of work in promoting what Townsteel really wants to do with regard to school safety. But Brandon himself is a relative new hire with Townsteel. He has a long background in law enforcement. He was also a former SRO, so he knows a thing or two about the subject. And he was first invited and joined Townsteel to really continue to focus in these areas. So he knows a little bit about product, but he really is more focused around the promoting safety within schools, establishing partnerships, and contributing to the industry overall. So Brandon, hopefully I did you justice there. If please feel free to add anything else, and then if you could introduce Chuck for us.
Sure. No, yeah, that's perfect. Not really an awful lot more about me as far as the industry. Like you said, I am a newcomer to the door hardware industry, so I'm getting to the point where I know enough to be a little bit dangerous as far as product goes. But like you said, I do have quite a bit of knowledge and background in actual school safeties in the buildings and actually doing it day to day when I was doing that assignment. So, but star of the show today is going to be our friend Chuck Wilson from PASS. Got to know Chuck over the past few months when I was invited to, forge the partnership with PASS for Townsteel. And I was graciously invited to join up with the technical committee for PASS, which I'm really thankful for. We do a lot of good work on that committee. So Chuck, as you can see here on the screen, he's been in the industry for quite some time, knows his stuff, very knowledgeable. And he's actually the co-founder of PASS, published author, industry recognized expert and for his volunteer work and everything he does for school safety. So, but I'm going to let Chuck talk a little bit more about himself and kind of where he comes from and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so thank you. Thanks for having me. I started in the industry right out of college and right into the world of being a systems integrator. So we did a lot of work with education facilities, college campuses, K through 12 schools, hospitals, a variety of things in the upper Midwest. So it was a company that was based in a large integration firm. But we did voice, video, data security, life safety, access control, fire alarm. We did all of the systems that you would think about for protecting occupants of a building and teachers, faculty, and so on. So I just had a long history of doing that, and I go out and talk a lot about technology for different venues, and we started PASS as a result of us being out and about, hearing from educators that they really need to have a technology roadmap to follow. And so that's when like you mentioned, Scott Lord earlier. Scott, myself, and a few others got together right away, and we partnered with the Security Industry Association, and we put forward a first guideline for schools to use, and we made that guideline at no charge to the schools so that they could see from a group of 65 subject matter experts at the time what we really thought about the basics and the foundational elements of school safety all the way through some advanced technologies. And we did a tiered and layered approach to school safety, and now we're 6 revisions in, and we're starting halfway through revision 7 now. So it just grew and grew like crazy over the last 10 years.
Awesome. Yeah, you guys have done a lot of good work in the years. So we're really proud to be a part of that myself, and I know Townsteel is as well. So you guys have been a great partnership for both of us, both ways. So just to kind of get on with a little bit of Townsteel stuff. So why are we involved with school safety, right? There's a lot of people in the industry that know Townsteel as a anti-ligature hardware company, right? That's kind of where we made our name known. And that came about because the company owner, Dennis, saw that there was a gap in being able to protect people in hospitals and behavioral health situations. So he decided that he was going to fix it. He was going to come up with a solution for it, right? And it's history since. We're one of the gold standards for behavioral health products and anti-ligature locks. So, evolving down the years. So why are we involved with school safety now, right? Same kind of thing. Dennis and our company VP, Todd, saw that there was a gap in some school safety door hardware solutions that we could probably solve. So Dennis and Todd did that. Just real quickly, you see on your screen, you see that lock with the red unlocked message. That's our newest, greatest lock. It's called our Aegis board lock. It's kind of what we're taking to schools, and people are seeing that it's really useful, really cost effective, and it's a solid lock for schools. So that's what we saw the gap is with board openings, right? So a lot of people, a lot of companies can do a lot of stuff with mortise locks, but there wasn't an awful lot of choice when it came to board locks. So Dennis and Todd came up with it, and here we are with this. So that's one of the things we saw the gap in. We were in a position to help, so we did, and we're not in the, thankfully, Townsteel and the leadership realizes that we're not in the business of just selling widgets, right? We want to be a contributor to the school safety arena. So that's why they didn't bring in a door hardware guy to do my job. They brought in a guy who was a school resource officer and someone who's been in the schools and knows what they're talking about. So we can talk about school safety in general and more broadly. Thankfully, they allow me to be part of the PASS committee, the technical committee. They don't have to do that. They let me do it on the company dime and company time. So that kind of really establishes what we're about. We want to further the message and further the mission of school safety. I was able to form our partnerships with PASS and the I Love You Guys Foundation because we really want to be partnered with people and organizations that have the same mission that we do, and it's to secure schools safely. And that's what we're looking to do. So you can move on to the next one there, Greg. So this is our overall Townsteel school safety program, kind of the way we view this, and we'll get to it a little bit how this was kind of extracted from the PASS guidelines, and I'll talk to Chuck about that a little bit. So we kind of view school safety in 3 buckets, if you will: physical security, policy, procedure, and engagement. So it's not just about securing one aspect of the school physically. Well, there's a lot of other things that go along with it, right? And we want to make sure that we're speaking to and partnering with organizations that have that same mindset, right? So it's not just one magic thing that's going to solve school security. There's lots of stuff involved, and we want to make sure that we're contributing on all 3 of those areas. All right, so we're going to get into this as I'm kind of asking some questions to Chuck. So Chuck, as you mentioned, you went through a little bit about how PASS came about and where it came from. So you were with PASS before it was really called PASS, from what I understand, right? So could you kind of give us just a little bit more detailed rundown of how PASS started, what your guys' vision was, and what really sparked you guys to create PASS and the guidelines, and kind of go from there, and kind of how it's evolved over the past 10 years that's been in existence?
Sure. So Yeah, what happened was NSCA, my day job was as the executive director of NSCA, which is a group of 1,000 system integrators for different types of technology around the country. So I represented the people that put stuff into the schools, did the implementation, the testing and terminations and all that. And so the Security Industry Association had a school safety committee that was formed not too long after Sandy Hook, and we had this mass notification emergency communications committee formed. And so we just decided that we should put the two of them together after we started to hear concerns from educators about um, all the different things that can go wrong. So we developed the premise from our very first meeting on. The premise was about an all hazards approach. So we didn't just focus on active shooter situations or anything like that. We looked at I think there was 12 or 18 most prominent things that we did research on that were everyday issues that happened in schools. And so we started to think about, okay, how can we develop a guideline or a roadmap for educators that we can offer to them at no charge that gives them our industry's best thinking about what to do first and then what to do after that, and to do it at every layer. So from day one, the layered security approach was developed at PASS. So we said that from the district wide level with policies, procedures, and concepts and training and all that, all the way into the technology, the door lock that you showed in the classroom, for example, all the way into the classroom, we said, okay, what could go wrong at every layer, and what can we do at each layer to deter, delay, and detect? And then, added to that is be able to respond appropriately. So deter, delay, detect, and then from the concept of what what can we do to help with a comprehensive school safety plan so accredited schools could maintain their school climate studies and fill out something that would appease, uh, like Department of Education, to appease school boards that we're doing something led by industry best practices. So that's what the guideline was kind of based upon is all of the different concepts there, and then starting with the very basics, what we call tier one, going through the medium, and then kind of a good better best sort of approach to this where we do the basics first, door locks and access and door intercom, and the simple things that we have to do to make our students and faculty safer. We started with that, and then we added on more complex and more integrated applications as we went through there. So with policies and procedures, it was about planning and preparing and practicing and learning how we can prevent acts of violence and everyday things that went on and stuff. And we got really good at this. So we found out that in the very first guideline is like, wow, this is really good, and people valued it. I mean, what and I was kind of saddened when we learned and we did our research to find out that educators and administrators, they didn't necessarily value our industry or regard them very highly in terms of our salespeople were coming in and just bombarding them with different information. Like one salesperson being there saying you need cameras all over the place. The next one's like, no, you don't need any cameras. You need access control. The other one's like, no, intercom. That's the way.
Yeah.
So the educators were, and our slide we'll show later kind of gives a.
Yeah, everybody's got their solution to the magic, they're all the magic pill, if you will, I guess.
Exactly, and they were chasing the dollars too. So it was like, you know, we want all of the funding available for just this one technology. And we're like, no. A comprehensive plan has to be put in place with different tiers, different layers, and an appropriate amount of technology at each layer. And it proved out over and over again to be a great way to approach school safety. And I got to tell you that the superintendents and the principals, the administrators, when being asked from parent groups and from school board members about what is our plan for school safety, they just hold up the past guidelines, say this is our plan, and
Yep.
it's like, okay, great, it's been, as you well know now with the technical committee, I mean, we work hard to think through every possibility of things that could go wrong and how to solve those.
Yes, we do. Every week I'm astonished. I'm like, man, I never even thought about something like that.
Every
Especially with
week,
the real smart guys and gals in the group, and because I'm not one of them. So,
every week.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Well, thanks, man. That kind of leads me to my next question, if you will. You touched on this already a little bit, that building a school safety strategy and plan, it can be difficult, it can be complex, and then to be quite honestly, it can be expensive, right? And a lot of districts don't have a lot of resources, right? They don't have a huge budget, and where you have some of these huge districts, they can spend all the money in the world and do whatever they want. So can you kind of explain how PASS addresses that a little bit when their guidelines and their tiers kind of, if you will?
Sure. So, it's pretty obvious when we go out and do our site visits, there's the haves and the have-nots in terms of the different schools in different states and how they're funded and all that. So we spend a lot of time helping schools get grant money and where to find the grant money and how to apply for the grants and how they can be how we can use simple things like E-rate funding in order to provide the network that the devices sit on and stuff. So we're constantly trying to help schools understand how they can afford the things and where to start with that. So everything scales, right? So we think about a school district with limited resources, and that's why we always start with tier one through the different uh, component levels. So we address policies, procedures, roles and training, communications and surveillance and access and the architectural design, the vestibules, if you will, how we enter from one single point of access. We look at alarms and detection and all of these things. And what we're saying is that we have to fill out tier one and make sure there's no gaps in any of those component levels. And then we'll go on to tier two, and then we'll go on to tier three with all of it. So rather than dumping, all of our resources into, weapons detection or into communications technology or access, or rather than dumping all of our technology on the outside of the building, is we want to use that layered approach and get the tier one stuff done and then move on to tier two. And when you start thinking about it, it makes it so much simpler for educators and administrators to rationalize how they go about getting their funding and how they write their grants and how they do their risk assessments and the whole thing.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing that really took me back that I really saw was a lot of thought was put in that. It was the tier system, right? Because obviously we'd love for every school to be at tier four, right? And have everything that they need, but that's just not feasible, right? So it was really nice that when you guys started this, you realized that, like, okay, we need to scale this thing, right? Because it needs to have a starting point and then the goal point at the end, if you will. And I think PASS really addresses that really well. And I like how you use the word roadmap. So the guidelines really are a roadmap for administrators to, like, okay, look, let's start here and just go down the list for tier one and then prioritize within those components and get it done. So really comprehensive. So cool. And speaking of guidelines and how school districts do stuff, so why don't you take me through the famous PASS bubble slide, if you will? I was introduced to this a while ago, and it's really awesome. And I know people ask for it all the time. So Greg's going to toss that bubble slide up there on the screen here in just a second. Maybe you can walk everybody through that, especially with our school administrators that might be on the call, so they can see how this works a little bit, maybe visually a little bit better.
Sure. Well, yeah, and like you were saying, this is our most requested visual aid when it comes to school safety because
Right.
everybody wants to know, where do we start, whether they have old technology, whether they have a brand new system, one new system but a whole bunch of other old systems in the other buildings, and what policies have to be done, what page does everybody need to get on at the district wide level, and how to get your parent groups, your community, your local law enforcement, the SROs and the uh, everybody, school board, everybody on the same page about what is our security posture, what's our profile look like, and what type of vulnerabilities do we have in our community that may be different, or in the way that our schools were built, how far away is help, in the time of an emergency? Are we 2 minutes from a local fire station, or are we 20 minutes, kind of thing? And where does this all start? And so this slide here represents, and the visual image is so cool on this, because the guy in the middle, he's the superintendent, or he's the school board administrator, or he is someone that's been charged with being the leader of this school, creating a well documented, well planned, well prepared life safety program for the school. And he's sitting there thinking about all these things that are written in the bubble slide. How do we assemble the team? What's the IT element involved? Who are the integrators? Who's our security director? What things do we have to do to get everybody in our community to make sure that, that if something does happen, that we're ready? This is the guy that stays up all night thinking, is it going to happen here? And is tomorrow the day it's going to happen here? Does the majority of people believe in this town it's not going to happen? And that's our biggest impediment to school safety, by the way, is the belief that it won't happen here. And we all know that it can happen anywhere, right? So this guy is worried to death about what in the world can we do effectively to make sure that we can prevent as many incidents as possible, and if there is one, we can respond and help out the best that we can in the most methodical and appropriate manner, right? So the fellow up in the upper right, though, he's the guy that our integrators and our manufacturers are bombarding. That poor person that's sitting there, having been a wonderful educator and administrator his whole career, and we come in and start talking about mass communications and access and intrusion and fire and video surveillance and different door locks and locking systems and apps on the phone and one button lockdowns and lockouts and visitor management, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to interconnect all this onto one common network that's going to reside, and we have digital endpoints that are sensing things and all that. And pretty soon this person just puts their hands over their faces like, okay, enough of the technology talk. I have no idea what you're talking about. But what the guidelines do is we've purposely distilled this down into having it be designed for what we call our avatar, the school administrator, that has to decipher what technology is maybe missing from their overall comprehensive plan, or where the gaps are at within what they've implemented so far, or what is obsolete, what things can't be used anymore or don't interoperate with any of the newest technology that they do want to try to integrate together. And then if that wasn't difficult enough, it's like, okay, now how do we get our community rallied around this, and how do we get the students to participate? How do we get students to, if they see something, say something, that they can be part of the solution? They can actually help become one of the first responders, or to help prevent something, from happening, because they've heard something, or they saw, or they know someone that's in trouble, or someone that has, been deemed as a threat, let's say. So we try to get educators, we try to get people, not in scaring them at all, but to try to go through what the role is, what the responsibility, how do we do drills effectively, and how do we make sure that we're training people so that when that day does come, that we're ready, that we know what to do. We're going through a big thing right now with substitute teachers. Like, okay, a substitute is brought in. How do they know with the intricacies of all of our VMS systems and lockdown technologies and duress alarms and all these things, the panic buttons? How do they know how to effectively plan, prepare, and practice and do all that? So we're constantly revisiting the guidelines. That's why we're into revision 7 right now. Is we're updating the guidelines to be modernize them all the time, and to adapt to some of the threats that we've been seeing in different locations, and how we can minimize different risks that occur. And then we're always looking at our checklist. the checklist in the back of the guidelines goes through all of the different things that are mentioned in the guidelines, but it's like, is it there? Does it work? Have we tested it? Have we done test and inspections? And in the event of an emergency, do we know what to do? And that's the roles of training and all of that. But it really starts with us trying to, and that's why this roadmap is so important. And this slide is such a great visual aid. It's like, how do we get our community and our district and our buildings, our faculty and administration and students, how do we get them all on the same page? That's what this illustrates, Brandon.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw this, I'm like, wow, number one, it's pretty cool looking just from sitting out there. But when you really dive into the content and how it's laid out, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. It really does. So one of the things you hit on when you were talking about the plan, prepare, and practice section, right, was like even the students and staff being part of first responders. And my humble opinion, when I was in my school, I noticed that the district and the school itself had really excellent policies, procedures, and plans, right? But sometimes we struggled with that culture of safety, if you will, right? So, like you and I both know, you can implement all these physical security systems and do all these great fun things, but if you don't have a culture of safety in the building, none of it really makes a difference because all it takes is people like, okay, when the band goes out to go march, right? We just leave the doors open, right? Or when the secretary is the person who is running the visitor management system, they see somebody walk up the door, they just buzz them in, they don't check their ID, don't do any of that stuff, right? So those faults can really override your entire security system, to be completely honest with you. So have you seen any examples when you've been talking to districts, schools, or experts where they've instituted any programs or protocols that have really helped build the culture in the buildings or in the districts for everybody to kind of be a solid stakeholder in keeping the schools safe?
Yeah, and what we've surmised in that whole thing is that it takes a strong security leader, just someone that's the leader of that culture, someone that can instill that culture and to have it go clear down to the classroom teachers, facilities, maintenance people, is that that everybody has to be on the same team and everybody has to be willing to communicate and to share and to trust one another. Man, and as you know, being a former SRO, if the students can trust their SRO and
Yeah.
if they can develop a relationship with them, that's when this thing starts to really work well, because then there's this ability to come up and say something, to do something, to spot something, and to be part of the solution, if you will,
Yeah.
and um, it starts with those doors being opened, in my opinion. So a lot of times, the students will, for convenience or whatever, go out the door, prop it open, let somebody in that couldn't get in the front door, let's say, and
Right.
man, we've seen just a lot of stuff happen when people don't follow the rules. So we want to know when that door is locked and in the locked position. It's one thing to be locked and propped open. It's another thing to be locked and in the locked position. And quite honestly, schools are certainly not like they were when I was in school. They're a different place now, and so we have to be more vigilant about the everyday incidents that occur as well. We didn't have the cyberbullying. We didn't have the situation where everybody left school that day as friends, but whatever happened overnight on social media or whatever created, some sort of tension between two students or whatever, and then the next day there's a brawl in the hallway. It's
Oh,
like, where did that come from so quickly? And so we got
oh,
to
yeah.
we got to be, as be prepared for about anything that could happen from day to day, and make sure that the teachers are part of this. One of the hardest things that we're wrestling with right now, Brandon, is what is a reportable incident.
Yeah.
So let's say there's a fight happening in the hallway. A classroom teacher, they come out to that hallway. Do they report that incident? If they have the technology, do they do they hit that button or don't they? And do they get involved or don't they? So schools
Right.
have to, when they're building that team and communicating, that's where the roles and the training are so important, because they have to they have to do it all the same. That
Yes.
building, every teacher has to do it the same. Otherwise, when that report is filed, they we don't want the teacher to get in trouble because they did something, but yet we don't want an incident to escalate because they didn't do something.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that's really where we're using the technology, or we're trying to have the technology help with those types of things, so that we have everybody knowing when it's time to call for that lockdown, or to hit that button, or to press that intercom, whatever they do to
Right.
initiate an alert. And that's why the technology is only as good as what the plan is, right? And so
Absolutely.
that's where we're at with that.
Yeah. It's funny, man. That's a fight that I had all the time in my building, because you have different teachers have different personalities, and they have different ways that they think they want to handle things, regardless of whatever the policy is. And a lot of times they were hesitant to let me know, because, I'm the cop, I had the trust of the building, don't get me wrong, but they're like, well, I don't want Johnny to get in trouble. It's like, and you had to explain to them, like, look, just because you tell me that something happens doesn't mean that they're going to get in trouble, or that I have to write up some formal report. But that's internally stuff that I need to know, like kind of who's got beef with who, so I can be on a lookout for it during lunch and during passing periods and things like that. So, but yeah, that the technology piece, especially with the e-panic mobile duress, and I know we're talking about that a lot in the technical committee right now. Actually, how many, what kind of alerts are for different circumstances. So that's a good point you make about consistency in reporting and being on the same page. So I know from personal experience that is definitely a challenge in schools. So excellent. So you kind of hit on some of the technology. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing right now in school security world, as far as technology or new practices, things like that? What are you seeing?
I think the number one is digital mapping. I don't know if you've heard that term used a lot, but
Yeah,
we,
I have.
we
I've actually was recently at a show where I was right next to a company that does really crazily detailed 3D scanning mapping. It was kind of cool to see.
That's a big one. And now I think I counted 12 states have some sort of legislation or bills or laws that are being um, introduced that would require it. So it's not even going to be optional. It'll be mandatory. And what we're monitoring it pass is, where do we put that in? Then if it's mandatory, should it be like tier one? And that's
Right.
what we're trying to gauge is. And the idea there would be is just so everybody knows where the incident occurred, and that we have the ability to get to the right door quicker if there is a need to roll a truck or whatever, that we can pull up to the right place and go the right direction, and all of that. So that's a big trend. Certainly AI is, it seems like that's all I talk about anymore. So with digital cameras, and as good as these new cameras are, is we have the ability to use analytics and some detection technology, and slap some software over top of the existing cameras, even to monitor, prohibitive items, let's say. So it
Mhm.
could be weapons. It could be like, why is this crowd gathering by this car at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? That doesn't seem right. Why is this person laying on the ground out there in the parking lot? That doesn't seem right. So we have this ability to, without having to monitor individual cameras all the time, is to use that weapons detection technology to be in AI to detect all sorts of things. We can detect moisture on the floor at the bottom of a stairwell. We can find that, hey, this roof has been leaking all night long, the night before because of a rainstorm. We can do all sorts of things with AI. And the second I start talking about AI, half of the people love me and the other half hate me instantly because AI is, you know my message is always AI for good. We're using AI for good. We're not using AI to replace people or anything like that. We're using it to make what we do to make a school safer. We make it better because we can monitor 60 or 200 cameras effectively, with one person. We're not having to, have that fatigue of, what happens when one person tries to monitor all these different cameras. So we're seeing that a lot. Definitely seeing classroom doors being locked during class times. And, you've heard that over and over and over again constantly, and it's our guidance. And, you mentioned that. And, there's a lot of schools that have dated HVAC systems and other things that make it really difficult to happen. But our message is today could be the day. It could happen anywhere.
Absolutely. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that. My wife is a fourth grade teacher, and she teaches in an old building. And I always ask her, "Will you teach with your door closed?" She goes, "Well, I'll teach with my door closed when they can figure out the HVAC situation in this place, and I'm not sweating to death or freezing depending on what's going on." So yeah, that's a big fight to have with, and that all ties into a lot of different things in the schools. But I and you and just about every expert in the field is going to tell teach with your doors closed and locked, right? It's a very simple fix. And to be honest with you, the stats from the unfortunate previous incidents prove out that if you're behind a locked, closed door and out of sight, your probability of getting out of that thing unscathed physically are almost 100%. So that's very good. So what else here? So what's on the horizon for PASS?
Well, we've made it 10 years, and we've done it without any. We don't have any staff. So we have over 8,500, I think it is, school districts now that have used the guidelines in some way, shape, or form. We've got 65 subject matter experts. We've got 160 or some odd partners with PASS, and we have 0 employees. So I think what's next is trying to figure out, how we grow and how we staff the organization, and where we go from here. We hear so much from educators, good stories, bad stories, and from other people that they know they need to make their schools safer, but they just can't get everybody to support the same common goal or the same way to do it, if you will. And I think what's next for us is to really continue to evolve the guidelines, and to like now we're expanding in Rev 7 that comes out next year. We'll have expanded more into cybersecurity. That's a big deal now. So we're trying to look at what is a best practice from the district-wide level all the way to the classroom with cyber. I probably get 30 emails a day about our opinion on if smartphones should be banned from the school.
Oh yeah.
And again, the second I talk about that, I've got half of the people loving me and half the people hating me when it comes to, the app. The kids use apps that are super important, health and everything that's needed on their phone. It's their communications to their parents and everything. But on the other hand, the teachers are like, they've had it with kids that are on their phones and, using Chat GPT and all. There's so many issues with that. So we're just constantly looking at what the role of PASS should be, and we're trying to stay focused in our swim lane, which is really the technology roadmap. We don't deal with things outside of that. So we stay laser focused on what are the current and the emerging technologies and the enhanced technologies that can make schools safer. So that's really what we think our role is.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So, so kind of the last question I got for you in this section, so what other organizations or resources would you be able to suggest or tell administrators and people in schools that would be a good resource for them to use or reach out to?
We got a lot of great partners. So Safe and Sound Schools comes to mind. Michelle Gay, she started that after she lost her daughter at Sandy Hook Elementary. So she's on our PASS board, and she's also the head of that organization. So we use them a lot for training and for behavioral stuff, things that we don't really deal with. So we partner with them a lot. I love you guys on the slide here. They they are a great partner for the standard response protocol and stuff. Talking about getting everybody on the same page, there's several different response protocols that are, kind of leading the way. And theirs is one of them that we hear about all the time that schools are using now. So we try to partner with like-minded organizations where if they do something really well and it's adjacent to what we do, we try to partner rather than have any of us duplicate the efforts of others. So schoolsafety.gov, they got a ton of wonderful resources too, and they've used the past guidelines as their technology roadmap. So that's kind of a neat partnership with the Department of Homeland Security and everything.
It's a brag I throw out every once in a while. I talk to folks. I'm like, yeah, PASS is referenced by the DOJ. So
Yeah.
they're not some fly-by-night organization. They obviously know what they're talking about, right? So I throw that out all the time. So.
And what's really neat about PASS is we're a 501c3 public charity.
Right.
It's a public organization that is just there with a whole bunch of passionate people trying to make our schools safer. That's
Right.
really our mission.
That's awesome. Excellent. All right. Well, let's go to some Q&A if we've got any. See if anybody's got some good questions for us.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. That was fantastic. Really great to get to know the philosophy behind the organization. It's always hard to get that from just reading a website. So thanks for the insights. One question that I had was, you mentioned it quite a few times about layers, but I'm not sure if you really defined that. Do you want to just explain in the past vernacular, what do you mean by layers?
Yeah, so we start, I think there's 7 layers. So we look at things from the district wide. So what is the district's policy for the way that incidents are reported, the way that the communications is dealt with? What is the protocol for alerting authorities? How do we know with consistency from every building that they report their incidents in the same way? When to call 911, that kind of thing. So we start at the district-wide layer or level, and we look at that and we say, okay, policies and procedures, roles and training have to be a district-wide philosophy and something that can be managed from the district level so that they can communicate with parents. They can be effective in addressing parent issues at school board meetings and things like that. So we start there, and then we look at the outside, the parking lot of the building and the athletic areas, the playgrounds and stuff. We look at that as the outside. Then we look at the building envelope itself, the entrances and the doors around the building, and then we look at the interior and the classroom. So what we do is we look at what is the appropriate technology to put in place at each of those layers, and then we do 4 tiers at each layer. So it's kind of like a 3D model of how this all fits together, and then we identify what components goes into the tiers and the layers. So it's more I made it sound more complicated than it is, but we've simplified that to be able to just say, hey, we need to deter, delay, detect at every layer that someone could be, causing, any kind of harm to our students and faculty.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I like the idea of this 3D model you mentioned. We almost need to make up a visualization of that. That
Sure.
bubble chart's quite an eyeful. I understand why this is so much involved, right? So totally get it. Brandon, you mentioned that your wife's grade 4 teacher, mine is as well. And one of the things, whenever somebody mentions the word grant, it's always a bit of a roll your eyes because of the amount of work it is to try and attract a grant, yet there's no guarantee of success at the end of the day. How does that work? You mentioned that PASS also, Chuck, helps schools go through that process to attract funding. Is that less stigmatized, or are there resources that PASS can provide to really help them get over that barrier? How does that work?
Yeah, in fact, we wrote a really good white paper about about that very question there. So when when you go to resources, then look at our white papers, it's about 3 down, I think, 3 or 4 white papers ago. There's a great article about how different funds and grants are awarded, and some are based on need, and a lot of them use the pre and reduced variables and things like that for the area. Um, many people underutilize the E-rate funding for this. So the infrastructure for the E-rate funding, and then we have a lot on um, bond issues and mill levies and things of that nature that the past guidelines could be helped to create what the amount of funds that you're asking for would be. Many of the states now, they use the past guidelines in their calculations for what they would award to a school based on their um, having done the risk assessment or whatever, is that they can go to the state and get funding if they can comply with, or to make sure that they're covering what's in the tier 1 of the past guidelines, which is really great, because then it's like super easy to say, I want this and I want this and I want this, and you go right down the list and you say that's going to cost 50 grand or 100 grand or 200 or whatever it is, and that's the amount of money you ask for.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize the past role was so integrated with that. So yeah, that's great to know. David asked a question here. I can't put it on the screen because he dropped it in the chat, not the question area. But he asks, how does regions like urban versus rural change the outlook?
At PASS, we say, if you've seen one school, you've seen one school. So it's a great question. It's a big challenge for us, because inner city schools, urban schools, they have a whole different setup than a rural school would. Basically, there's a huge difference in the design of the building. So we work with SEPTED and different sorts of methods in order to determine where technology actually fits based on the type of building that it is, the distance from like I was talking about earlier, how long does it take to get response there, and then the region is the big thing that we're seeing now, because these, like the southern states, with so many open classroom type designs, instead of like a building that's 3 stories, sits on one city block and has one main entrance. That's a whole different beast than ones that have remote classrooms and all that. So we have to take a whole different look at the layers when we have these outdoor campus type buildings. It makes it very difficult.
Yeah, totally makes sense. But from what I understand, your methodology can be applied irrespective of the situation of the school.
Yep. That's the beauty of how the guidelines were developed, is we took into account every type of building that we saw across the 130,000 buildings or whatever there are in school buildings in the United States. And then we can even look at it in terms of like some of the religious church based education facilities that have a church attached to it or across the street from it, is we can apply the past guidelines to those facilities as well. They all have different challenges, but they're addressed in the guidelines there.
Yeah, makes sense. Chuck, you're talking about AI, which I thought was interesting. But I guess the question is, when you put yourself in the role of a financial decision maker in a limited financial resource school district, I mean, it just kind of feels all overwhelming, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, okay, well, we know we've got to protect the perimeter with some kind of intercom to the front desk is kind of like a logical starting point to allow remote opening to ensure that, people from the outside are monitored as they come in. But I mean, where do you draw the line? And how do you make the decision between, should we just automate every lock in the building so that we just press a button and everything just literally locks down? But who can afford that? Through to AI technology you mentioned. I mean, where should we start if we've got a limited budget with that?
Yeah, so that's what we do is, if you go to the guidelines and you see that very first layer and the very first tier, that's where you start. You just got to do the fundamental stuff first. And there were schools 10 years ago when we started past, they didn't have anything. So it's like, okay, let's put in a door intercom, maybe video on it, but let's buzz people in rather than everybody just coming and going through every door. So that's exactly, to answer your question, Greg, is that's exactly how the guidelines have evolved, is that we said, okay, let's do this first, then do this, then do that. And then what happened was we adapted that based on some incidents that occurred. It's like, no, wait a minute, in Rev 3, then let's address what just happened at this school and let's go with window film or whatever. And so we just kept working and working towards the most common things that we saw, the most vulnerable, points within a building and stuff. That's how it evolved.
Yeah, that's great. I guess that the answer keeps coming back, just go to the website, download the guidelines, and just start, and then start asking your questions after you do that.
Yeah, and every resource is free, by the way. So whatever you see in terms of documents or the guidelines or the checklist or whatever, they're free for anybody on this call to use. And thanks to partners like Townsteel here, is we can do that for free. So it's very cool.
Exactly. Question here from Drew. I think the trend is going away from global lockdown as a primary go-to. The ability should exist, but there's downsides to that being the first reaction. You comment on that? Maybe even Brandon, you might even have some thoughts on that, given your background as SRO as well.
Sure. I can go with that a little bit. So yes, is the feature and the technology there to do global lockdowns immediately? Is it there, and is it applicable in some circumstances? Yeah, it is. But I think maybe what Drew might be thinking, and I kind of think the same thing as well, is, so let's say we're in the middle of the school day, something happens while people are either in passing periods or they're at lunch or whatever the case may be. Something happens, someone hits that button, we go on a global lockdown. Well, where do all those hundreds of kids go if the entire campus is locked down? Right? How do we get them to safety if we have just instantaneously locked every single door in the building and all these people are out in the hallways? I hate to say this, but coming from my former profession, I have to think of, to help me be efficient in my job, what I used to do, I have to kind of put myself in the mind of the bad guy, right? So what would they do to create the most carnage that they possibly can, right? And if we're in a situation where we lock that door, all those doors down instantaneously with all those people in the hallway, and I'm in the building as a bad guy, what have you just given me? You've given me the ability to inflict maximum carnage really easily. And these folks that are going into these schools, most of the time, that's what they want. They're unfortunately, as crazy as it sounds, they're looking for a body count, right? And that's a great way for that to happen. And you didn't really think about that, right? So there needs to be options, in my humble opinion. I'm not a huge proponent of global lockdowns and even instant lockdowns on doors for the classrooms themselves. I prefer a mechanical solution, just thinking from an operational perspective. But there are some circumstances where that's a good thing to have the ability to do that in certain businesses, maybe. But I'm not a huge proponent of it in the schools. That's just me, and I think that's some of the thinking that you would see from some of the experts in the industry. I don't know. What do you think about that, Chuck?
Yeah, we hear that, variations of this all the time, and I think the big question is using the guidelines. You have the flexibility to create that philosophy and that guidance, and that's what needs to be done. There, everybody has to be on the same page about that very question right there.
Right. Excellent. Good question, Drew.
Yeah, Drew just added another comment to that as well. He said the question is, are you seeing this as well in terms of the trend, I think he's referring to? What's the conversation around this that you're hearing? I think you may have already encapsulated some of that answers.
Yeah, I know when I'm going around to districts and talking to them, when people bring up like, oh, we want to go to a global lockdown solution, so we can lock all our doors down at the same time. And then when I tell them, okay, that's fine. Number one, I hope you have the money for that, because that is not a cheap option, right? And number two, have you thought about it from this perspective? And I gave that same kind of circumstance, right? And they're like, wow, well, we never thought about that.
It'd
Right.
be easy.
So,
It'd be easy, Brandon, if everybody was in a classroom at that particular moment in time.
oh yeah, if we could assure that everybody was in the classroom when the bad thing happened and they could hit that button, perfect. I'm all for it. But I'm telling you, from working, my school we had 1,600 kids and about 300 staff in that building. There was not 1 second of a school day where every single person was either in the classroom or in an office. It didn't exist. So I think that's just not a realistic solution for a building that's that busy all the time, because you're going to get into the circumstance where you're locking somebody out of some place where they're trying to get to safety maybe. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like an active shooter situation. Like Chuck talked about, with PASS approaches it from an all hazards perspective, right? Well, even if we go into lockdown for a hazmat situation, whatever the case may be, right? You're still potentially locking people out of places where they're seeking safety and putting them at risk, right? So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Well, thanks. Thank you both. We are out of time now. So we'll need to just wrap it up. But this has been just great. Thanks, Chuck. And I guess, it's really also fascinating that the guidelines continue to evolve, obviously, as things change, technology changes, I guess legislation changes. So that's probably something that we all need to check in with in terms of school districts. So in terms of wrapping things up then, any unanswered questions, and there's a couple of them there, we will make sure that they're followed up on. We're also going to email all the attendees, including a few folks that didn't make the actual webinar. You feel free to contact Brandon or PASS. Again, that information will be sent in the email. The main Townsteel School Safety, again, has all of these references. So feel free to go to that URL if you need anything. We also have there other resources as well, such as past recordings, that kind of thing. Also feel free, we've got 2 more webinars scheduled. I'm not sure what the plan might be after that, but right now we've got 2 more. One is going to be very much focused around law enforcement, and then the final one in September is talking about, again, back to the budget challenges. So feel free to sign up for those as well. Again, these links will all be provided, but there's a lot of resources out there. Townsteel have got several as well. And of course, PASS, we've been talking about that the whole session. So thank you everyone for attending. We're going to wrap it up here. Again, make sure you sign up for those future webinars. They will be different topics, but all part of the overall theme of how we're going to make our school safer and how we're going to keep our kids safe. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thanks for attending, everybody. And Chuck, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.